knowing
He's singing.
which direction we are going. There's no knowing where we're rowing or which way the river's flowing. Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is a hurricane a-blowing? Not a speck of light is showing, so the danger must be growing. Are the fires of hell a-glowing? Is the grisly reaper mowing? Yes! The danger must be growing, for the rowers keep on rowing, and they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing.
Oh, make him stop, Sonny!
Walker, this has gone far enough. Quite right, sir. Stop the boat.
Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Seraphin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name.
Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public. And we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called the Kyle Seraphin Show.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth, because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Tuesday. It is July the 2nd, and we are rolling live right now on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Yeah, your eyes did not deceive you. That was Willy Wonka. That was the OG creepiest scene that I remember in my childhood. There's nothing stranger than a man sitting at the helm of the boat letting you know that they are going to just keep on rowing. And what's with the spider or the ant in the background with the magnification? Very, very weird stuff. We started that off because I'm fairly confident that is what the inside of the Democratic strategy sessions are looking like. People have lost themselves, and we're going to get into a bunch of it. So today's episode, the danger must be growing. I think the strategy is very simple, though, and I'm going to lay it out up front because I like that, what they call bluff. We're going to talk about the Heritage Foundation's piece a little bit later, but the bottom line up front is the enemy is making a mistake, so let them fight. Do not interrupt any of this nonsense. We're going to go ahead and talk about all of it. We're going to get into Joe Biden's sort of meltdown, the meltdown of the left, what they're going to do, donors asking for their money back. Can you get them on a ballot? Well, I want to keep pushing it. And I also want to tell you that in addition to this conversation that we're having today, there's also going to be a chat with Mike Howell, who contributed some of the information that we're going to be talking about today. He's going to be on the Dinesh D'Souza podcast with me. We are going to dig into all things mechanical and also maybe a little segment about when we think America went off the rails. Yesterday, I covered it on Dinesh's show. If you guys follow this show every day, then this is not news to you. But I think 1913 is a really pivotal date, pivotal year in American history when the structure was undermined, when the concept of a republic was eroded, and we got ourselves into this idea of a democracy. And democracy is really a dangerous concept. It's not what America is about. It's not the thing that we have. We get really lazy, and we quickly refer to our country's systems as democratic. And while they have some democratic sort of nature, the republic is actually sort of elitist. So if you guys didn't catch that yesterday, you check it out. It's a fast run through 1913 to the present day. And let me just give you the other bottom line up front. I actually think that we are in a really, really good spot right now. I don't know if we're going to have an election in November. I don't know if the October surprise will be mail-in ballots for all and there will be nothing going on at the polling locations. Always a possibility. But The Supreme Court is giving us a lot of hope because what it says is, despite the meltdowns that are going on the political left, that the American media, they can't stop it. The political machine can't stop it. And the trend towards liberty is continuing. People are interested in that dangerous liberty, and that means there are risks. People will do things wrong. We have to focus in on what is true. We need to focus in on what is factually accurate. And we also need to pray for this country. My wife says the rosary almost every morning before I go live. I hear them downstairs when I walk by. And it reminds me what a brilliant and beautiful place we live in. What a great country to be alive in, even in all the tumultuous goings on. Because we can still pray for this country, and we can use our words instead of our weapons. We can use our voices instead of our hands to fight our neighbors. And that is really, really special. So I hope you offer up a prayer today at some point in time during the day. Just take a stop and just thank God for this country and the ability that we have to communicate and the ability that we have to still affect things without getting what they would call kinetic and physically violent. Doesn't mean there's not going to be some rough patches, but I think that's really good. While we're thinking about that, I want to say that you guys can support my friends over at Catholic Vote. If we got the Catholic vote behind the Republicans, the default conservatives in this country, if we got all the Catholics to vote on values of the religion, it would be a landslide and absolutely devastating to the political left. For some reason, there are still Catholics out there that don't get it, and many that don't vote. If you guys want to support my friends over at Catholic Vote, they keep this show rolling. We do some really fun stuff with them. And I recommend, if you guys see The Loop, there was a nice interview with Brian Birch, who's the founder of that, and he's a friend, and he's a great guy. He's very, very intelligent, and he's charismatic. CatholicVote.org/give if you guys want to donate to the program. If you want to get The Loop, you can always do that. Rose in the chat already threw it out there on our Rumble channel. It is CatholicVote.org/get-loop. And you can sign up for the single best one email you will get daily. And I've had people come back to me, not people associated with our show, just friends that say, hey, man, I really appreciate it. Actually, Dinesh D'Souza's producer. He said, I really like you turning me on to the Loop, because whatever I read in the Loop in the morning ends up being the news cycle and stories that a lot of conservatives are touching on. They've got a great sense and head for the news. So check that out. All right, let's get into what's going on here. I've got like a strategy, and I wasn't sure if this was sort of like the way we should end it or the way we should begin it. I think we're going to begin it with this. We have this sense that we're in charge. And over, things happen that we couldn't predict. Things work out in our favor that are not obvious to us, that don't make sense from the outside looking forward. We can't predict the future very well. So this is a little clip from Godzilla. I don't know why I'm doing pop culture today, but there's nothing more different. Godzilla creature movie versus Willy Wonka, which was just character-driven insanity. This is the instinct that man has to try to control things. I think we should resist it. And right now, our best move is the last line of this little clip.
This alpha predator of yours, Doctor, do you really think he has a chance?
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control, and not the other way around. Let them fight.
And there it is. We got to get out of the way. We'll just let them fight. There's no other way around it. So here you go. This is what's happening in their party. Democrats may not be able to replace Joe Biden on the ballot in these states. It doesn't really matter how many states. This is coming from Newsweek. It was published yesterday morning. It turns out it doesn't have to be very many states. If they can't easily and accurately predict the ability of a replacement, you lose in a general election, because you cannot win even a flooding of ballots on a write-in candidate. It doesn't work. This is kind of why all of this talk, he needs to be replaced. What can they do? It's too late for that. They've committed. In the poker world, we call it being pot committed. That means you've thrown enough money in that it does no longer matters. You have to stay in the pot. It's actually always a loss. You're just relying on pure luck at that point. And this is essentially where things have gotten for the Democrats. Heritage Foundation has been doing a very good job. They have seen this as a problem. They have seen this as a problem for Democrats, and they have been working on the background to ensure that as time went on, the noose and the requirement to stick with Joe Biden was there. Now, a lot of people are wondering, how do they just now find out about this? And I think this is the question that a lot of us had when we saw the meltdowns that were going on. It was like, oh my God, how do they keep it from us that he was so screwed up, that he was so ineffective, that he was so unable to do this job? And all of us are going, hey, have you guys just had your head in the sand? Have you closed your eyes and put it somewhere dark and not been paying attention? It's totally absurd. So now they're in this weird moment where they have to both back Joe, which is awkward, and they've got to push back against members of their own party. That is the let them fight. And we actually saw the original breakings of this a little bit earlier. If you're watching what goes on at every single Joe Biden rally right now, what do you see? What have you guys been seeing Mark Naughton cover when he goes out there? It's always the same people, right? It's the radical far end of the left, the anarchist, socialist, weirdo smoothies, the Marxist types that can't figure out, whose side they're on, but they hate everybody, but they probably hate Donald Trump more, but maybe they don't because they really hate Joe Biden because of what's going on in Gaza. So this is the Palestinian Marxist smoothie that keeps getting blended up. Somehow they got the queers involved, whatever that is. By the way, if you had told me that in 2024, it was totally okay to refer to gay people and the sort of gender confused and the weirdos that wear sexual costumes in the world, if you said that we could refer to them as the queers because they self-refer to themselves as the queers, I would have just been shocked. We're just in this weird place where they have captured it and made their own names for themselves, even worse than what we would have come up with if we were trying to think of something derogatory. And then the word Palestinian is being used as a smear, as we talked about yesterday. That was the big complaint. So here you go. You've got these Palestinians supporters. You've got the queers for Palestine. You've got the black queers for Palestine. All these wackos getting together, and they are pushing back against their own party or their own people that they would otherwise be aligned with, because those people are not far enough to the left. So the far end of the left is now attacking what is really a radically far left position on abortion, on the border, on racism, and all the other nonsense that the Democrat Party has sort of adopted as their normal stance. And people are not even happy with that not being far enough. And they're used to getting their way. So they're throwing this little tizzy fit. And they're protesting outside of Joe Biden's rallies and outside of his fundraisers. And they are mad. And they are looking to start an armed revolution if they could do it, but they don't have enough people because not very many people are that nuts. So we just get out of their way. They exposed that originally. And then you realize that even the people inside the party who kind of want to tack back to the middle because they kind of want to win an election with non-crazy people, they don't know what to do either. So we're in this strange little spot. MSNBC, by the way, I don't know what this host's name is. Maybe you guys know his name, but he's the worst interviewer I've ever seen. He's the Black Sean Hannity for the left. And what I mean is he talks and he talks and he talks and he feeds answers till eventually he gets to his guest, and he's been talking for several minutes and the guest is like left to try to rephrase their own answer what this guy already gave him. Anyway, this is fun. This is fun to watch because what's going on in the circular firing squad of the political left is they are turning on people that are Barack Obama supporters, and they're like, hey, you remember when Joe was the vice president? You remember that? And then Barack Obama had a really bad debate in 2012. Joe stood out there and tried to help him. Why aren't you trying to help Joe? And the answer is because Obama doesn't want anything to do with this nonsense. This will sully whatever legacy he has because Biden's really bad at this. And it turns out he's been bad since like 1987. All right, little taste of what's been going on in this sort of confusing space. Stay out of it, folks. Just let him do it.
I don't get it, but Democrats are split on the best path forward for Biden to beat Trump in November, with some entities calling for Biden to drop out of the race. Former Republican Stuart Stevens says Democrats should stop panicking, writing in the New York Times, quote, of all the Democratic pearl clutchers, the most disappointing and offensive are the Barack Obama insiders who can't bring themselves to do what Mr. Biden did for their old boss. Cover his back and fight. We have two MSNBC political analysts here to discuss, hosts of the Fast Politics podcast, Molly Jong-Fast, and former press secretary to VP nominee Paul Ryan, Brendan Buck. It is so good to have you in the house. Brendan, what a Democrat. What are they doing? I mean, how hard is it to stand by your man in the face of the assault that they know is coming and has come from Republicans, and just sort of rally around? What's your assessment of not only what you saw Thursday night, but the reaction afterwards? And how does that hurt their efforts going forward?
I mean, I think rallying around makes sense if this was just 90 bad minutes, as Anita Dunn was trying to tell you folks yesterday. That wasn't just 90 bad minutes. That was the worst debate anyone has ever seen that reveals some very deep-seated problems that they have. A candidate who is clearly he didn't just walk into some rhetorical traps and just have a bad night. He showed what we have seen for a very long time. This is a person who has significant cognitive issues that they've been lying to us about for a very long time.
Who is they? I feel like we've been telling you the truth. I feel like we pretty much knew that this was what was going on. 90 bad minutes, right? Well, that turns out to be the narrative. There it is. Jill Biden, this is coming from Daily Wire. Jill Biden reacts to her husband's poor debate performance, saying that she won't let those 90 minutes define his presidency. You guys remember when you elected Jill Biden to be in charge of something? I guess she was in charge of wearing couch patterns on dresses. What a weird thing the first lady has become. I don't like any first ladies, for whatever it's worth. I don't like Melania going out there and talking. I don't like the Be Best. I don't like whatever Michelle Big Mike was doing. I don't like any of them. I don't like first ladies because no one elected them. And we choose somebody based on who they are, and their spouse will clearly be a big part of that. But they shouldn't have an office of the first lady. We shouldn't have created this weird mythos, because then you end up with this handler, this woman who seems to be driving a lot of this stuff. You guys just said Jackie O was the last first lady. Good one. I don't like her either. I don't like any first ladies. None of them. I don't get it. I don't want them being in charge of anything because we didn't elect them. And yes, do they come along with the president? Sure. And then what? Why are they out there handling around? And eventually you end up with this situation where first ladies are making decisions when they are pushing policy on their feeble old husbands, because we keep electing older and older and weaker people. If you can't do the job and you've got to let Dr. Jill Biden step in and move you around and lead your rallies, by the way, that's really, really gross. When your 81-year-old husband is just he's so feeble that this gal gets out there and is trying to lead these shrill chants to get, followers whipped up. It's bizarre. But it is inevitable, I do think, if you put that much responsibility or you actually assign that much value to somebody who is not elected, who just is sort of hanging out with the president. You guys remember that movie Dave? That was actually one of the ones I really liked, where the president was actually like dating somebody. I kind of like that because I knew there was no first lady that was ever going to get involved. It was kind of like a nice story. Was that one? Is that the one? No, there was another one. American President. I don't know. There were two movies, Dave and American President, and they run together in my head. One of them, he was married and then he was swapped in. The other one, he was single guy going out there trying to solve some problems. I think Dave was not the right one. I think American President was the nice story. For whatever it's worth, this lady is taking cover shots on Vogue. She's out there covering it up. And so what you got people out there saying, hey, this is the real problem right here. This person has been covering it up, has been hiding the ball and acting like everything is fine when it's clearly not fine. It's not just her, people. A lot of people knew this. Anybody who's been exposed to Joe Biden, anybody who's paying attention the way that we have, we've all seen the cuts, and they are not cheap fakes, whatever the heck that means. They are real snapshots of somebody who has moments that are absolutely incompatible with the presidency. So here is Carl Bernstein, who's still coasting on his name, talking about, yeah, people knew about this, and now they're really concerned. Where were you before the debate, Carl? Why didn't you go out there and say, hey, about like 9 months ago, this guy can't run. He can barely make it through the end of the presidency. He might have to step down. This is what they're really trying to hide. Because the minute they acknowledge that Joe Biden is no longer fit to run, and they can't do that, I don't think. The minute they do it, they also have to acknowledge what happened in 2020 and that he had no business being there in the first place. Then they're going to own 3.5 years of bad policy, of bad leadership, no leadership at all, this vacuum that exists that Jill Biden steps into. So all of that stuff is incompatible with being able to hold on to power. And that's what this is all about, right? Let's be realistic. The story is power. Can you hold it? Can you hold on to the government? They've got all the executive branches walking in lockstep. They're in for diversity. They're in for the queer thing. They're in for the far left attitudes, all the crazy stuff, the FBI marching in a parade that has, guys pissing into each other's mouths. If you guys didn't see that horrific stuff, there was fellatio and pissing and, degradation happening on the streets of San Francisco. The FBI walked in that parade. Like, I'm so disgusted with that. I'm so glad I'm not part of that organization right now. It's horrific. Anyway, Carl Bernstein acting like he knew, but he just kept it a secret.
Journalist. So, Carl, according to the people you've been talking to, what are you hearing?
Well, these are people, several of them, who are very close to President Biden, who love him, have supported him, and been among them are some people who have raised a lot of money for him. And they are adamant that what we saw the other night, the Joe Biden we saw, is not a one-off, that there have been 15, 20 occasions in the last year and a half when the president has appeared somewhat as he did in that horror show that we witnessed. And what's so significant is the people that this is coming from, and also how many people around the president are aware of such incidents, including some reporters, incidentally, who have witnessed some of them.
So wait, the reporters knew and then they weren't going to talk about it because what, they're covering for their guy? They're doing the stand by their man routine that we just heard about on MSNBC? Weird. So you're saying that the news media is going to acknowledge that they are not doing the job that they are apparently supposed to do. Also, yet another sort of act of admission. You have to admit the guy was terrible. Now you got to admit that people knew about it. Weird. At some point, they will have to acknowledge, probably when they lose, if they actually lose this election, if we actually have an election, which if you guys just watch the AMRAD podcast, you know, we have some real doubts, only because nothing is sacrosanct to the political left more than power. The tyranny of the majority is their goal. And they have no problem destroying all of the institutions. They debase the medical industry. They debase the pharmaceutical industry. They debase government and law enforcement, all the authorities that you would normally, and the media, no problem. These have been going on for years, but we all saw that veil dropped very dramatically as the goalposts moved as we were watching them. We watched them pick them up and run with goalposts and say, no, this is where it actually has always been. And we saw you move it. This all happened in 2020, starting in March, going through the end of the year. The wildness of what went on in that election cycle, the fact that 1 million people or however many hundreds of thousands showed up in D.C., the fact that they put up fencing and National Guards for the inauguration of Joe Biden, despite there being no physical threat. I went over there on the wall, behind you guys, behind me, I guess. On the wall, I have my inauguration badge that has 2 things on it. It was for Joe Biden's inauguration. I had access as law enforcement to get into anywhere I wanted in the city of D.C. It was locked down with high anti-scale fencing. Where was that fencing on January 6th? They suddenly it popped up. Why do they already have that ready to go? And they locked down a lot of space, folks. DC Northwest was like West Berlin, East Berlin. I don't know, maybe both Berlins. There was like clear areas where you could travel and be free. And there were areas that you were like within a cordon that was held by the National Guard and a bunch of law enforcement. Bizarre. You know what else was on there? My COVID badge that told me what I had to do in order to stay safe from COVID. I keep it because it's just this weird little historical snapshot. We have to remember so many people in America just rolled over when that happened. They just gave up the ghost. That doesn't mean that some people aren't sticking with it. They're trying to hold up this brave face. We're going to cover that in 1 second too, because I think it's fun. Also because anytime I can hear these people debase themselves and just kind of pander, we should know what they're saying before we get any deeper into this. Let's say thanks to folks who are actual patriots who actually love this country in the same way that you and I do. And they are our friends over at Patriot Coolers. And they made this one in 2017. This was one of the early Gen 1s. The new ones look even better, but even this is an outstanding piece of equipment. And I take it to the pool. I take it all over the place. And it's been at least 20 states with me, including during that COVID lockdown stuff. PatriotCoolers.com is where you can get your own tumbler. You can get your own rotomolded, hard-sided cooler or the soft cooler. We actually used the soft cooler yesterday because my wife accidentally bought cheese that was not cheese. Have you ever done this? You buy something, you're like, oh, that looks good. And you get back and you're like, not dairy cheese. And then you're like, oh, it's made of tapioca and weird stuff. Yeah, we used a Patriot Cooler to bring it back to Costco and said, hey guys, take this garbage back. We don't want it. PatriotCoolers.com, PatriotCoolers.com. The promo code Kyle will save you 10%. KYLE saves you 10%. $50 or more, you're going to get free shipping. I'm getting really good at just spitting this stuff out of the top of my head. KYLE, save yourself a couple bucks and check it out. Whenever it's time to invest in a new cooler or a new tumbler, get that one. Maybe you have one of those Stanleys with lead paint. You don't want that. All right. So Mika from Morning Joe, who is one of the dumbest people on television, I think. She's pretty awful to watch. She's kind of funny. She's going to stand by her man. I want you to know how weird it must be when serious people are really concerned and Mika is on board with Joe. Yeah, here she is.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe on this Monday, July 1st. This morning, we are waking up to a sea of headlines and opinion pieces from major news organizations, former party leaders, and very loud whispers, mostly behind the scenes, from present leading Democrats who say it is over. Here's a taste of the global call for President Joe Biden to get out of the race. The New York Times editorial board says Biden is not the man he was 4 years ago, calling his candidacy, quote, a reckless gamble. Editors at Georgia's largest newspaper, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, echoed that take, demanding the president pass the torch. Quote, Biden deserves a better exit from public life than the one he endured when he shuffled off the stage on Thursday night. And then there were the headlines, sneering, mocking, jeering all at once. This was the performance that has gotten us to this point.
We have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24% or 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our health care system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
It's so good. It's so good how bad he is. And by the way, major kudos to Donald Trump again on that debate for his discipline in that particular situation. The memes always show Donald Trump with like the head of an eagle. You guys have seen these before probably. And there's something about him going like, he just cranes over there like, is there something about to go off the rails? He could sense it right when Biden got to numbers, which is his kryptonite, along with words and walking. Again, really amusing. They finally beat Medicare, whatever the heck that means. You could hear him going off the rails. That was actually when he was on a roll. He was actually saying words at a faster rate than the other times. But the upside is they're not ready to count him out. So this is the rallying of the troops, getting everybody together. Look, this is great. If the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Journal-Constitution are going to have a fight with MSNBC and CNN and NBC, and they're all going to just push back. Like, what? How are we going to do this? The thing that I took away from all that stuff, and I've listened to that clip about a dozen times now, Democrats are not interested in what America is at all. They have no interest whatsoever. They're interested in democracy, but that's not America. And if you guys listened to our show probably about a week ago, we did one that was called Government and Gangsters. And then yesterday, you could have listened to that and heard kind of that quick run through the timeline. We stopped being the American republic that we thought we were. We still hold on to some vestiges of it, and we should probably try to cleave our way back towards that, because it is going to be the 50 states that save us. It will not be the federal government. The 50 states are the ones that should be going. Interestingly enough, what did he say that they wanted to do? They wanted to fix Medicare and Medicaid, do senior care, get affordable child care. Can anyone explain to me under what circumstances the federal government, the one that runs like our military and the ports of entry for, national security, the people that are trying to keep the barbarians at bay, how are those people going to try to change the price of childcare? And why is the president talking about it? Like, I've read the Constitution. I read it more than I feel comfortable with. I read parts of it all the time. There is nothing in Article 2 that suggests that the president should be making policies about childcare or elder care or anyone's care, really. He's supposed to effectively discharge the duties of the office, which means run down and implement the laws that he doesn't get to pass. We're supposed to have two independent bodies. One represents us, the people. That's the House of Representatives. The other represents the states, which we screwed that up. That's supposed to be the Senate. The states are supposed to be a step removed. Every single time that you hand power down, you delegate it to something, you concentrate it. The state power that's supposed to exist in the state houses is supposed to be concentrated, distilled down into the Senate, so that the majority of the states get their say in the Senate and the majority of the people in each individual district get their say in the House of Representatives. I don't know how we blew this, but this is why democracy is actually a threat. It's the opposite of what America is about. America is somewhat elitist. It pulls itself away. It distills down to get protection of the minority and the rule of the majority, but they are in constant contrast and balance. They have to be in balance. Otherwise, you end up with a little taste. This is coming from our friend Lou over on Twitter. Democracy is the tyranny of the majority, folks, and it doesn't work out. It's lethal. It's dangerous. Old clips. Mike Lee shared this yesterday, so I'm sharing it today.
Democracy is a form of government based upon the principle of majority rule, period. End of discussion. Now, that's not very complicated. Majority rule. It's easy to understand, easy to sell to the masses, and I might add, deadly. For example, what would you call a lynch mob? That's majority rule. There's only one dissenting vote, and he's at the end of the rope. Now, that's pure democracy in action. But wait a minute, you say. The majority should rule, yes, but not to the extent of destroying the rights of the minority. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are no longer describing a democracy. We are speaking of a republic. A republic is a limited democracy. It's a form of government based upon the principle of limited majority rule. Limited so that the minority, even a minority of one, can be protected against the whims and passions of the majority. And how do you protect the minority from the majority? You write down a set of rules on a piece of paper. You say, this we can do, that we cannot. At the top of the paper, you write the word Constitution. And then everyone agrees to follow the rules no matter what the temptation. And when you're finished, you've created a constitutional republic.
It's so simple. It's almost like what they did in this country. Shouldn't we have been sticking to it? The plan was good. And we started subverting that plan in the 19-teens. We probably started cutting down some of the stuff starting day one. I imagine in the 1790s, they were also upset about how people were walking away from the principles. But the minute that you give the federal government the ability to do anything, you give them default position, that they are first among equals, that they get tie going to the government, like the Chevron doctrine did, the Chevron deference, to defer to government, whatever you want to call it. It's mediocrity. It always is. And then when you give them the ability to take money directly from the people, regardless of the source of income, I don't know how people decided to do that. I don't know where people were sold on the idea that, you know what we just need is more federal control. This all comes down to the idea that the people on the political left, and that's where these ideas come from, they want a king so desperately. That's why the decision yesterday in the Supreme Court is quite amusing. The discussion about whether or not Donald Trump had immunity, what we would usually call qualified immunity or sovereign immunity or executive immunity or presidential immunity. Does that concept exist? And is there a constitutional basis for it? He was charged for some things. It's not going to be a cut and dry like, well, the case is thrown out under Jack Smith's attempts. But it did come in favor, at least in a limited way, that the president is allowed to do some things and nobody else has the ability to stop. The key to that piece of paper that has Constitution written on the top of it is that we have three supposedly co-equal branches of government. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a primacy or a priority for each given thing. When it comes to executing how things work, that's the job of the executive. When it comes to how the government is supposed to function, the most number of people are involved in that decision. That's why the legislature is the first. Article 1 continues to be our Congress. The House and the Senate are supposed to be the places where all the ideas are generated because you can fight them out. And you know what the dead result is? When you have, 535 people arguing over the best policies? Do you know how hard it is to get consensus? It turns out that's on purpose. The goal is to make this thing not go anywhere. So whenever you hear Republicans being attacked this term, and I'm not a huge fan of anybody that's in these places other than Tom Massey. I really like Tom Massey. But when you hear these people like crying about, well, they're the most non-functional Congress in history, hallelujah, I say. Let it be so. Let it continue to be so. Let them continue to be decidedly and horribly unfunctional, non-functional. Pass no more laws. Repeal laws only. That'd be great. How about just delete only? So all of this is the idea of let them fight. Just like in the Godzillas, you're supposed to have the two biggest, stupidest, baddest, whatever it may be, ideas, smash them together, and unless there is an overwhelming winner, then nothing happens. Great. A stalemate. A push is a win, just like in Las Vegas. If the House rules are stacked against you, and by the way, the House rules are stacked against you whenever the government's involved, they will do things inefficiently. They will take all the money. The only winner is government and government employees. So a push is a win, and that means when nothing happens, America is better off. It's very simple. That should be the cry of conservatives, the battle cry. Push is a win. Stalemate is a victory in this case. And all of that is to say that we went all the way back to before we replaced the speaker. And what did we say here? No one for speaker was the Kyle Seraphin show position. It's correct because it just preserves a very, very minor majority. And it just says, yeah, we're not going to go and infringe on the minority, whichever that is. I constantly want this stuff. It's so strange to watch them do this. Like they're just fighting it out. In any case, as brought up, they want a king. The left does. Why? Because a king is one person who can make unilateral decisions. The rule by fiat is what it was called. I order it and therefore it is. And they love that idea that they can elect somebody who will come in and say, here's what we're going to do. By the way, they hate it if it's somebody on the right. If Donald Trump comes in and says, we're going to secure our border. Well, you got some things you got to be able to do. You can actually order the Border Patrol to do things. You control DHS, but you can't control the money. They love the idea of a king, except when it's not their king. And so that's how you end up with this nonsense. Joe Biden didn't like the way that the Supreme Court rules. It turns out the Supreme Court, as 9 people, have an equal footing with this guy. So I guess he can dissent. He just can't do anything about it because it's not his decision to make. This is a feeble old man crying about something. I don't remember nearly as much. And maybe I need to pay better attention. In fact, if you guys have some good examples in the comments, please throw them down there. Are there good examples of Republican presidents crying about rulings of the Supreme Court? You really got only one choice. And the choice is that you can vote in somebody, hope somebody resigns, and then put in another confirmable justice. It's so strange. So Biden claims that no one is above the law. Yeah, exactly. The Supreme Court just decided and told you how to interpret the law. That's what they do. And how he was so confused about this, I mean, it makes sense. The guy barely knows what's going on. So he went out and addressed America. He tried to do a do-over. And his do-over had to do with how bad his debate performance was and could he save it with a 5-minute speech. It's less than 5 minutes in total. I won't play the entire thing because that's actually really painful. I'm going to cut into about 30 seconds in and we'll listen to him talk because he wants to make this about J6 because that's all he's got. He's got to live in the past. They did a spray on tan to make him look more like JFK back in the day when JFK, what did he have, like Atkinson's disease? And so he pops up and he looks like very tan and vibrant on television. And you got Nixon looking pale. The contrast between Donald Trump, who probably does spend a ton of time outdoors. He may have a spray tan too, but the man is outdoors all the time and he's always talking to people. Then you got this indoor dog, Joe Biden. So they spray painted him up. They used the Donald Trump spray tan option, and they threw him out there and they gave him a teleprompter on both sides. And watch his eyes on this. If you're watching on the audio, if you're listening on the audio, you can't see it, but he's turning his head left to right like every 2 or 3 seconds. He's trying to make it look like he's engaging. He's in like all by himself. He's standing there in this cavernous hallway speaking to teleprompters, and he thinks that this is going to recast it. It doesn't really matter because they're stuck with the guy. We're going to cover that in the last few minutes here. I want to cover down on how that works out. So let's listen to Joe talk as he does. as best he can. Here he is describing how we don't have a king, even though they want one.
This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed. For all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the president alone. This decision today has continued the court's attack in recent years on a wide range of long-established legal principles in our nation, from gutting voting rights and civil rights, to taking away a woman's right to choose, to today's decision that undermines the rule of law of this nation. Nearly 4 years ago, my predecessor sent a violent mob to the U.S. Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. We all saw it with our own eyes. We sat there and watched it happen that day. Attack on the police, the ransacking at the Capitol, a mob literally hunting down the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, we all saw it with our own eyes. Some of us saw different things than others, it turns out, Joe. Some of us actually saw what happened, that there were a few hundred people in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands that got out of line. And for a ransacking of the Capitol, that was probably the worst ransack that's ever been done. Every barbarian horde in history laughs at what happened on January 6th. I actually saw this really classic meme. For some reason, I like the IRA at this point. Not the things they did per se, but like the amusing humor that goes along with the Irish Republican Army. Very, very amusing stuff. Someone keeps sending me these memes, so I'm just reading them and like, And it's got this, it says like, American Republicans. And it's like, oh, we went into the Capitol and then we got arrested for trespassing. And then it's got this like IRA guy and he's wearing the beret and he's got this like RPG on his back. And he was like, you got into the Capitol and you didn't blow it up? You know, the difference between extremism in the United States and where it's happened anywhere else is a testament to our founding principles, that conservatives do care about really preserving that thing, the Constitution, that paper that protects the minority from the majority. Regardless of what side you're on, you actually want to do that because it's constantly changing. That balance in America is often changing. Meanwhile, you got this guy talking about how the only limits are going to be on like self-imposed. It's fully nonsensical. You know how I know that? Because I read at least a quick summary of how that thing went down. They said that there is the delineation between official acts and unofficial acts. And if you're involved in official acts as described by the Constitution, and they're letting the lower court decide what that is, then that can be peeled back up. This is going to take forever, by the way. It's not going to get in front of anybody. It's not going to get in front of a jury before the election. The official acts and the unofficial acts will be determined. And then if you did something that was illegal during an unofficial act, then you're held accountable. So everything he just said was nonsensical. And I don't know who people are getting their news from if they're listening to Joe Biden and why they think that makes any bit of sense. But the fact is they're stuck with this guy. And if that was their best sort of grab back and say, and by the way, the the way that people were trying to cover this in the news media is sort of incredible. They said that he seized on this moment, that he was he was powerful and he was strong, and he did all this kind of fun stuff where he was pushing back and letting people know that he was actually still the guy that they thought he was. It's like, that was pretty feeble. He barely could get through the words, and he's all by himself, and it lasted less than 5 minutes. Americans now know, in an extended cut, Joe Biden, whether you're on the left or the right, you know that he's a failure. This is where it got really interesting, I thought, because this was considered good news. This is coming from, I guess, CNN. They're reporting the amount of money that was raised in June. $127 million raised by the Biden campaign, which was a strong showing. I wonder how that's going to look. They have $250 million in cash on hand. So they're going to run all their hit ads, but the amount of horrific and tragic coverage they got from that 90-minute agreement to do a debate with CNN. I don't know what that's worth. Billions? You can't swing that. People cannot unsee it. So all Donald Trump has to do, and you saw some of these things. If you watched Tracy Bean's show the other day, you saw that she just played this little cut. It's literally Joe Biden talking with Donald Trump making facial reactions. Minimal, by the way. And he's just kind of like, because that's how bad it was. That's how stupid. And they can't do anything about it. That's the real piece. They're going to have to be stuck with this guy. They cannot get rid of him. So that's why you heard him go to the things that are most comfortable. And I actually got a little grab here. The things that are most comfortable for the Biden administration is racism, which you heard him say. They talk about the civil rights and people having the vote pulled back. They talk about abortion. The other things are always over here on my pad. Open borders. White supremacy is everywhere. You're supposed to love America, but America's really bad. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what they do. And they hate the Constitution. This was a kind of a fun little piece that I saw over on MSNBC, and I wanted to share with you guys because we talked about it the other day, the idea that there are black jobs, and Donald Trump said it as kind of a throwaway line. They were very offended by this, whoever this guy is. This is Jahan Jones. Very offended. And he's part of The Readout, which is another blog. So we covered, the first one was coming out of the Rachel Maddow. This one, Joy Reid. Quick's observation is that he made a bigoted and false claim about immigrants taking black jobs. I think we debunked that the other day with the cotton picking videos, which are quite funny. But what you're seeing on here is that there has been a history of jobs associated with certain races and ethnic groups going back pre-Civil War in this country. And the one that I always think of, that I always key in on, is the racial disparity and the sort of hatred that existed between blacks and Irish people before and immediately after the Civil War. And I just threw you a couple of these. You can go get like graduate school lectures on this kind of things. White, Irish, American populations, which were not considered white at the time, by the way, they were still considered an underclass, and blacks, African-American populations, didn't matter where they went into conflict. It was on the railroad, it was in farming communities, because the Irish would work for less. They came in, they had a lower standard of living from living in Ireland, they were used to being dead poor, and so they despised the black former slaves, who actually, a lot of whom had a higher standard of living while living on plantations. It's kind of awful to say, but the Irish came in such destitute manners that they were willing to take jobs that would kill them. And so blacks hated the Irish for taking the jobs, and the Irish hated the blacks for having a better standard of living. The idea that there are jobs assigned to certain racial groups at certain times, it's 100% the case. And you guys can think of a bunch of these things. Like there are ethnic stereotypes on purpose. There is an entire movement of people that came in and immigrated to this country from China. And I grew up knowing that there were Chinese restaurants and they all had the same menu. They came in as a block and they joined America, and they came in a place where they found a niche in society and they carved that out. So the idea that there are certain jobs that are being worked by certain people is very American and always has been. Just picture a nail salon for me. I don't go to nail salons, but I know people do. Like nail salons. Are there Asian women working in there? Yeah, there are. Every time you go in, it's just a thing. They've carved out this little niche because they've found a market, they've found an ability to do it, and they've been able to scale it and commercialize it. So the concept of certain jobs being taken by certain people is very, very American. And this fake outrage, this faux outrage about white pundits talking about an overwhelmingly white country, it doesn't make sense to the actual history of this country. But these guys are basically banking on the idea that you don't know anything about history. They're also banking on the idea that you don't know anything about how the system works. And that's why, if you guys join me for Dinesh D'Souza's podcast later, I'm going to have Mike Howell on. He works over at the Heritage Oversight Project. So this is the Heritage Foundation, the Oversight Project. This was a memo they drafted, now it's going back about 2 weeks ago. He's the executive director. Mike Howell says 50-state review of reversal and substitution, because the question they knew long before the debate started, they did this analysis 4 months earlier. Can it happen mechanically? And there are at least 3 states where they will not be able to get Joe Biden taken off the ballot and somebody else substituted in. And Fox News is starting to cover this pretty well, so that's good. This is the reminder that they were going to have to fight in their own party. Let the Dems deal with this nonsense. Let them fight it out. It's not our fight. All we need to do is make sure that the lawfare is prepared so that if they try to pull off the thing that they really can't do anyway, that they're going to have to deal with the consequences. And so here's Fox talking about it.
Yeah, isn't it funny how the party that's preaching, oh, we got to save democracy, wants to bypass democracy, bypass all those primaries, bypass all those caucuses, and just make a decision by the party elites. But setting that aside, I worked with the Oversight Project there at the Heritage Foundation for the last 4 months. Elections are not run by the party. Elections are not run by the federal government. Elections are run by the states. Each state has a set of laws. And many of these states, about 16 of them in particular, do not allow you to replace your candidate unilaterally. You don't get to go to the convention and say, oh, Joe had a bad debate. Now we're going to put in, Gavin or Gretchen or somebody else. You can't do that. Look at RFK Jr. He can't even get on the ballot on many of these states because he didn't meet the threshold in the timeline. So even if they wanted to, short of death, you cannot simply change him out.
The mechanics are very, very clear, which is why you have this dissent. You've got the Mika type people that are saying we got to back Joe. You've got the others saying he needs to be replaced. And then the last one are sort of the apologists that are just trying to act like this was not what you saw. Don't believe your lying eyes. I think that is the default position that generally happens. This is coming from that show, The Weekend Again, on MSNBC. But this one was my favorite take because it's actually quite funny. Hayes Brown is the writer, and he says that Biden couldn't fight history. He couldn't fight history because at the first debate, every incumbent president fails. That's essentially the claim. And so they go back and they talk about Barack Obama and that many people have had poor showings. This was just another example of a sitting president who's got too much on their mind. They're very, very busy people. They're very, very important. They're more important than you. And they don't really have time to just knock it out in a debate because they're doing real serious stuff and debates are show. That's the claim. You guys believe that at all? Is anyone buying that? You know how I know it's nonsense? Because he spent like 8 days at Camp David. 8 days hanging out, resting, getting the Derek Zoolander treatment, which I just deleted off my board. But the Derek Zoolander deep relaxation, right? Trying to program him so he could at least get some of his things right. And what did he end up doing? He can't figure out whether a millionaire is a trillionaire or a billionaire. He can't figure out whether he's talking about COVID or Medicaid. He can't figure out numbers. He can barely walk up there. And if you saw the final piece, which someone played it, and it has Rocky music over the top of it, so I didn't want to play that because I don't have rights for it per se. It shows Donald Trump walking off the stage. By the way, what a weird environment to have a debate in front of two people, knowing that millions of people will see it. But it's just you and the guy you're debating and the two weirdos that don't like you from CNN in front of you. And Donald Trump is like, all right. And he like shakes it off. Kind of like when you've done a TV hit. By the way, I've done a couple of TV hits in studios where I was remote. And when you walk in there, it's just like a camera operator and maybe one other person, maybe a makeup person there, and they, pad you or whatever, so you're not so shiny like I always am. I don't do makeup here. But they just sit there and they listen, and then at the end of it, they're like, have a nice day. And then you walk off and you're like, I just communicated with millions of people potentially. It's kind of weird. It's a lot of anxiety for that moment. And then you just walk off. Donald Trump walked off under his own power and he was like, well, I guess we'll go get a sandwich, whatever. I'm going to see if they got anything in the green room. I wonder if they have those nuts I like. I really hope they have Chex Mix or whatever Donald Trump does. And then you show Joe Biden and like Jill comes up and she's like got his hand on his back like a prom date that's trying to get somewhere, and they just sort of like slowly kind of dodder their way out. And it takes forever. Trump is already in the parking lot. He's already getting into his limo and getting away. And Biden is like looking at the stairs like it might be the end. That's all really wild stuff. In any case, them trying to tell you that this was just, history. All of this stuff is a win. Again, let them fight. Let them have this. If the best case scenario is they actually try to replace Biden, because then they definitely lose. The worst case scenario is that they actually keep Biden in which case he's devastated because he's terrible. So all of these are bad and bad and bad. And it just shows me, I think, the bad idea theater that exists on the political left. They can't help themselves. They're always doing this. Before we get into our final piece here, let me just throw a little plug over here for my buddies over at Mad Hat Jerky. You guys are ordering this. I think you can still use the code USA. Start with the website, matthatjerky.com/Kyle. So put Kyle on the end of Matt Hat Jerky. Normally you would get 20% with our promo code. Today you can use USA and you should get 30% off. It's a great deal. It's a great product. It's a really tasty snack. So if you're in the market and you're like, hey, it's really good, but it's a little rich for my blood, I get that. 30% off is a pretty good chunk off. You get almost a third. Go ahead and check them out. Use code USA in honor of America, in honor of July 4th. And this week, I think it is one of those times, what's more American than beef jerky? It's a little kid, 11 years old. He's now 18, started a business by walking around selling it to his neighbors wearing a cowboy hat. What's better than that? And that is the American dream, is that you go out there, you find a product that people like, and they're willing to pay the money that you're willing to ask for it. MadHatJerky.com/Kyle. Check them out. Definitely check them out. I just ordered mine is en route. It shipped yesterday. So I've got like 2 pounds of it coming in. I don't screw around when I buy stuff, guys. I just buy it in bulk. That's the way I got to do it. All right. That's kind of where we're at for the day. I'm going to give you a palate cleanser. I'll give you a 5-star review. We crossed the barrier of 1,000 5-star reviews. Really appreciative for all of you all doing that and pushing the algo. Let's keep that pushing above. I'd love to see it because they always readjust us down half dozen or so. And we're making these 3 steps forward, 1 to 2 steps backward moves. So if you guys can keep giving us those 5-star reviews, we'll keep reading them here on the show. There's some really funny ones and we really do appreciate it. The funnier and the weirder, the more sarcastic, the better, the happier I will be. How about this one? This one is not sarcastic. This is coming from Not So Happy Camper, which is a little sarcastic. Steve Baker, going back a little ways, 5 stars. Most excellent interview. Again, the magnetic door locks at the Capitol. I missed the memo on how they will open if you just follow the instructions. It makes complete sense from a fire safety perspective, and now I know you and Steve do the best interviews. Thank you. The key that we like to do is we like to just not be sensationalized, and we love to be able, if there's information we can debunk it, we're going to do it. So Steve Baker and I and the Suspendables, he's working on some big stuff and continues to, like groundbreaking story of the century kind of stuff. And so we're going to keep covering down on that. Steve's a great guy. We appreciate him being on the show. I want to show you this little blurb here. Again, even when they get it right, they get it wrong. This is like one of those little funny moments. This is a little taste, a little palate cleanse for you guys as we go into Weird Wednesday. Oh, I did promise this show. Hold on, before we do it, let me talk about something really weird because it's awful. How about this? That's still going on. We're still covering this. Reminds me of Steve Baker. The Covenant School killer, Audrey Hale, was almost committed 3 different times for mental health crises and managed to dodge it. This is reporting coming out of the Tennessee Star. If you guys want to go pull it came out yesterday. This is the same newspaper, Tennessee Star, that was facing down that First Amendment attack on them, that was trying to have them do prior restraint when they published out the journal. All this stuff is good because they keep pushing the envelope and they refuse to just bow down. These are transcripts of interviews talking about 3 different times when Hale was almost committed as a patient at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Again, all of those things probably should. Commitment is really hard, folks. If you've never been in the mental health world, I used to work in an emergency department. And so in the psych ED, which is what I actually did a lot of work in, we rarely committed people for more than even 24 hours. We would have 72 hours for the psych hold. They would almost never get that. And I don't think I saw a single involuntary commitment because you are taking something without due process. And that's a really big deal in this country. Again, we should protect the minority, even the mentally ill. We want them to be able to get help and we want to not drag them into something. The asylum system was abused. So there's a lot of people that are rightly concerned about stepping over those boundaries. And you don't want to be somebody who's a political minority, let's say, and have the government come in and say, well, you are no longer fit to be part of American society. So we're going to take you out of it. And by the way, you lose your gun rights when that happens. So that's a big deal. It turns out this is one of those dangerous moments when somebody got away with it and the other warning plans. There's a couple of other stories out there talking about how a psychotherapist didn't report homicidal ideation, which is required under law in every state that I'm aware of as a mandated reporter when you're a therapist or whether you're a medical professional or you're in law enforcement. You're supposed to do all this stuff. The real problem is this. I think we may have to open up and expand our definition. If you are on some of these psychoactive drugs and if you are in cross-sex hormones, you need to be restraining yourself and not owning a firearm at that time. You're not okay. So this is one of those moments when I think that more reporting is better, more discussion is better, and instead they're doing the opposite of it. Not good. All right, here's an example, our little palate cleanse of the day, of not more reporting, in fact, less reporting. And you'll notice, think about all the environmental groups that you've ever dealt with, you've ever seen, you've ever read about. Are they ever on the political right, really? Or are they pretty much lefties that don't get it? This is just a funny little story of sometimes you're just the unlucky bear, and they do exist.
Turns out, unlucky bears really do exist. This one is named Richie, due to albinism. His fur is completely white. He was mistaken for a lost polar bear by an animal protection organization who tranquilized him and sent him to the Arctic. In the icy wilderness, Richie couldn't find food, and being smaller than the polar bears, was chased and bullied by them. Arctic experts noticed his fur was yellowish, different from polar bears, and upon observation, they discovered he was an albino grizzly bear. They tranquilized him again and sent him back to the North American forest. After some time, Ricci was once again mistaken for a polar bear by another animal protection organization and was sent back near the Arctic Circle. This time, Ricci started running to warmer areas. On the way, however, Ricci is dropped off at a nearby polar bear exhibit. Staff there recognized him as an albino grizzly and sent him back to the North American forest.
How awful is that? Minority of one, that poor bear. Nothing worse in the world, probably, than being an albino grizzly and being thought that you belong in the Arctic. Anyway, the whole point is that we are supposed to protect the single minority, even the minority of one. And maybe line up your shot before you take it. Maybe a little bit of accuracy and precision. That's what we do here. If you guys like this video, make sure you've shared it. Make sure you've liked it. Make sure you're subscribed. And if you want to follow us on Rumble, you can hit the follow button. And afterwards, it will give you the opportunity to subscribe. That's only on the browser. I don't know why it doesn't work in the app, but it doesn't. So that's what it is. If you guys want to contribute $5 a month to support us, we appreciate it. It's like 23 cents a show. And we do the best we can with the product. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We will see you guys again tomorrow. First thing, 0930. And if you want to catch me on Dinesh D'Souza's podcast, we'll be talking to Mike Howell. I think it's going to be really, really fun. He's promised that he's going to red and white pill me on this kind of stuff. So if you guys want to talk about that, I think there's a lot of hope going on right now. All right. God bless you. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.